Good morning everyone. I'm Karen May Serrano of TCP3 and we're from Group 8. We're here today to discuss about Robert Gagne's hierarchical theory and his conditions of learning. First, let us know who is Robert Gagne. Robert Gagne was born on 21st of August 1916 and he died on 28th of April 2002. He was an American education psychologist who studied at Yale first undergrad and he went to Brown University for his PhD. He pioneered the science of instruction during the World War II when he worked with the Army Air Corps training pilots. He went to develop a series of studies and work that simplified and explained what he and others believed to be good instruction. Gagne was classified as a behaviorist, but he falls somewhere between behaviorism and cognitive psychology because he tried to bridge the gap, and his hierarchy of learning makes the transition of behaviorism and cognitive psychology. Now, we will learn about the Gagne hierarchy of learning. First, we have the signal learning. Second is the stimulus-response learning. Third is chaining. Fourth is verbal association. Fifth is differentiation. Sixth is the concept learning. Seven is rule learning. And the last one is problem solving. Let us discuss it one by one. Number one is signal learning. This is the simplest form of learning and consists essentially of the classical conditioning first described by the behavioral psychologist Pavlov. In this type of learning, the animal or individual acquires a conditioned response to a given signal. And the response are diffuse and emotional, and the learning is involuntary. If you will remember from our past lesson, the example given by Pavlov, before the conditioning, we have the neutral stimuli, which is the dog, and the bone is the unconditioned stimuli. Then, during the conditioning, Pavlov rang a bell, holding the food for the dog to hear it. And after conditioning, every time the dog hears the bell, he came to have some food. Number two is a stimuli-response learning. This is more sophisticated form of learning, which is also known as operant learning, which was originally developed by Skinner. In this kind of learning is simplified by animal training. The animal makes precise response to specific stimuli. Stimuli-response learning may be used in acquiring verbal skills as well as the physical movements. Again, from our previous lesson, this is the same with the operant learning by Skinner. Specific consequences are associated with the voluntary behavior. Rewards is given to increase a behavior, and punishment is given to decrease a behavior. Number three is chaining. This is a more advanced form of learning in which the subject develops the ability to connect two or more previously learned stimulus response bond into a linked sequence. It is the process whereby most complex psychomotor skills are learned. An example for this one is shown in the picture. A boy riding a bike and a girl playing a piano. Two stimulus response was connected, therefore they learned psychomotor skills. This type of learning often seems to occur so naturally that we do not notice the specific series of events which led to it. Number four is verbal association. This is a form of chaining in which the links between the items being connected are in nature. Verbal association is one of the key processes in the development of language skills. This learning is a type of chaining, but the links are verbal units. The simplest verbal association in the activity of naming an object, which involves a chain of two links. An observing response enables the child to identify properly the object he sees. And an internal stimuli enables the child to say the proper name. Just like the example from above, the girl identified the dolphin, while the other one, the baby, saying mama properly. The fifth one is differentiation. This involves the ability to make appropriate responses to a series of similar stimuli that differ in systematic way. In this type of learning, the student must learn different responses for stimuli and distinguish between motor and verbal chains he has already acquired. Just like the example from above, all of them are similar stimuli but one of them is different from the rest. The first one, there is a 4 bowls of apple. Other bowl has a green one while the other bowls have all red ones. Second is the dogs. All of them have the same breed and color, but the other dog, his right ear is white while the others are brown. The sixth one is concept learning. This involves developing the ability to make a consistent response to different stimuli that form a common class or category of some sort. In concept learning, the student's behavior is not under the control of particular physical stimuli, but of the abstract properties of each stimuli. Just like the example from the picture, the first column shows different varieties or breed of ducks. Then in the second column, they want to select everything that is a ducks. In the learning concept, we respond to stimuli in terms of abstract characteristics like color, shape, position, and number, as opposed to concrete physical properties like specific wavelengths, particular intensities. Concepts have concrete reference even though they are learned with the use of language. Number 7 is rules learning. This is the high-level cognitive process that involves being able to learn relationship between concept and apply this relationship in different situations, including situations not previously encountered. It forms the basis of learning of general rules, procedure, etc. In learning a rule, we relate 2 or more concepts. Rules are, in effect, change of concept. The above picture is a compilation of traffic rules and road signals that we used to follow when we were driving. In our school also, there are also rules we need to follow for us to have a peaceful and wonderful school life. If the student has learned the components, concept, and rules, the teacher can use verbal instruction alone in leading the student to put the rules together. The last one is problem solving. This is the highest level of cognitive process according to Gagne. It involves developing the ability to invent a complex rule, algorithm, or procedure of the purpose of solving one particular problem and then using the method to solve other problems of a similar nature. In the set of events called problem solving, individuals use rule to achieve some goal. When the goal is reached, however, the student has learned something more and is then capable of new performances using his new knowledge. Thus, the problem solving requires those internal events usually called thinking. Without knowledge of the prerequisite rules, the problem cannot be solved.
I'm Francis Cesar G. Rivera from Section 4 and I will discuss the 9 steps in planning instruction. Before you immerse yourself into Gagne's 9 events of instruction, it's a bright idea to think about your instruction goals and learning objectives. This will give you the context you need for the 9 events, so you can make sure they fit the content and your students' knowledge. Like many other learning instructions, Gagne believes that it must be first planned well before it must be considered effective. So here are the 9 steps of planning instruction. The first step is to identify the types of learning outcomes. Learning outcomes are an umbrella term for what your students will be able to do once they've finished the course. You could call the learning outcome the takeaways or the lesson to be remembered. To identify the learning outcomes of your instruction, it must answer the phrase, at the end of the lesson, students will. An example of it is, at the end of the lesson, the students will have identified the steps of planning instruction. The second step is to identify the prerequisite skills or knowledge the learners must have. Once you've identified the learning outcomes for your lesson, it's time to identify some learning objectives. Effective learning objectives allow students to show specific ways that they have acquired knowledge, skills, or a change in behavior or attitude. To identify the learning outcomes of your instruction, it must answer questions like what behaviors or applications would help you to know what students have learned. An example of this is at the end of the lesson, students will be able to apply the 9 steps of planning instruction in the learning environment. Moving on to the third step, identify the type of instruction needed to reach your outcomes. Instruction are the methods and process that is actually used to change student behavior or attitude. It can be in the form of individual or group activity, presentation, cooperative projects, worksheets, modules, and homework. The fourth step is to specify the learning context. Specifying the learning context or telling the students why they need to learn it and where they will use it in their life and what is expected from them and what they will gain from learning the instructions, or give them a glimpse of the outline of the objectives that you created in the previous steps. Step 5, or record the characteristics of the learners. There are diverse learners. Any age group include learners with varying different characteristics, including academic ability, physical ability, language, gender, ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic factors, and personal experiences. That is why you need to see different learning styles as you see fit. This may demand as visual, auditory, and tactile learners, which caters varied teaching methods. The sixth step is to select the media for instruction. Once you identified the characteristics of the learners, selecting the media such as what you are going to use to teach them or to teach the instruction is the next step. You may stick to the traditional way of instruction like printed resources or use electronic ones like PowerPoint presentations or video instructions for visual and auditory learners, or involve Google Jamboards for the participation of tactile learners. Yet, keeping in mind that the learning outcomes expected from them are still presented in the usage of this media. Now, we are down to the 7th, 8th, and 9th step. 7th step is to plan to motivate the learners. It is getting the students excitement or making them motivated to actually learn the content. Like in step 4, learners perform better when they know what exactly is expected of them and what they need to learn during the entire course. To really encourage learners to internalize the course, you should consider introducing with a personal goal setting activity. For instance, you could ask your learners to outline their expectations of their upcoming um, learning journey. The 8th step is to test the instruction with learners in the form of formative evaluation. To test the instruction with learners in the form of formative evaluation is to do a trial run test the instruction with a small group of students before putting it out for the entire group. Formative assessment, formative feedback, or assessment for learning, including diagnostic testing, can be used as a formative evaluation. The last step after instruction, using a summative evaluation to judge the effectiveness of the instruction. After testing the instruction with the learners in step number 8, use a summative evaluation where you try to determine if it actually worked and if the learning outcomes were actually met as identified in the first step of the process. To sum up the 9 steps of planning instruction, let us recall each steps. First, you must identify the types of learning outcome. The first step is where the teacher determines what they want the students to learn. Second, you need to identify what prerequisite skills or knowledge the learners must have. This is where the teacher decides what they need to know beforehand in order to be successful. Third, identify the type of instruction needed to reach your outcomes. This is where the teacher decides what he or she needs to actually teach the students. Fourth, specify the learning context. Fifth, record the students' characteristics or the characteristics of the learners. Sixth, select the media for instruction. Seventh, plan to motivate the learners. Then, 8. Test the instruction with learners in the form of formative evaluation. Then, ninth or the last is use a summative evaluation to judge the effectiveness of the instruction. If you followed the 9 steps correctly, we can now proceed to the 9 steps of Gagne's events of or delivering the instruction that will be discussed in the next slides.
Good day everyone, I'm Lawrence Payne D. Miranda from group number 8. I'm here to report Robert Gagne 9 events of instruction. Let's begin. Number 1. Gain attention of the students. Ensure the learners are ready to learn and participate in activities by presenting a stimulus to capture their attention. This is the most important of all the steps. We have to ensure that all learners are listening and actively are moving on with the next steps. Next is number 2. Inform students of the objectives. We need to inform students of the objectives or outcomes for the course individual lessons to help them to understand what they are expected to learn and do. Provide objectives before instruction begins. Number 3. Stimulate and recall or prior learning. Help students make sense of new information by relating it to something they already know or something they have already experienced. Number 4. Present content. We can use strategies to present in Q lesson content to provide more effective instruction. Organize group content in meaningful ways and provide explanation after demonstration. Number 5 is provide learning guidance. In this step, we advise students of strategies to aid them to learning content or resources available. In other words, help students learn how to learn. Step 6 is illicit performance or what we call practice. Have students apply what they have learned to reinforce new skills and knowledge and to confirm correct understanding of course concepts. Next is one of the most important steps. Number 7, provide feedback. Provide timely feedback of students' performance to assess and facilitate learning and to allow students to identify gaps in understanding before it's too late. Provide timely feedback of students' performance to assess and facilitate learning and to allow students to identify gaps in understanding. Next will be the step number 8, assess performance. We need to test whether the expected learning outcomes have been achieved of previously stated course objectives. The last and the final step is step number 9. Enhance retention and transfer. Help learners retain more information by providing them opportunities to connect course concept potential real-world application. So, to summarize the 9 events of instruction, Gagne 9 events of instruction can help you build a framework to prepare and deliver instruction content while considering and addressing conditions for learning. Ideally, you should prepare course goals and learning objectives before implementing the 9 events. The goals and objectives will help situate the event in their proper context. The 9 events of instruction can then to be modified to fit both context and students level of knowledge. That will be all. Thank you for listening. Have a good day. Stay safe.
My name is Hannah Grace Sabadot, TCP-3 from Group 8. Different instruction is required for different learning outcomes. Gagne's theory asserts that there are several different types or level of learning. Furthermore, the theory implies that each different type of learning calls for different types of instruction. Gagne named 5 categories of learning: intellectual skills, cognitive strategies, verbal information, motor skill, and attitude. The first major category is intellectual skills. This is the one that has 5 different levels. Intellectual skills all deal with procedural knowledge. This is knowing how to do things and knowing how to use something. And there are 5 subcategories that are hierarchically ordered. The first category in intellectual skills is discrimination. And discrimination just involves distinguishing one object, features, and symbols. The second category is concrete concepts, identifying classes of concrete objects, features, or events. The third category is the defined concepts, classifying new examples of events or ideas by their definition. The fourth category in intellectual skills is the rules, applying a single relationship to solve a class problem. The last category is the order rules, applying a new combination of rules to solve a complex problem. Conditions of learning. Call attention to distinctive features. Stay within the limits of working memory. Stimulate the recall of previously learned component skills. Present verbal cues to ordering combination of component skills. Schedule occasion for practice and space review. Use a variety of contexts to promote transfer. The second category of the learning is the cognitive strategies. Example of learning outcomes. Employing personal ways to guide learning, thinking, acting, and feeling. Condition of learning. Describe or demonstrate the strategy. Provide a variety of occasions for practice using the strategy. Provide informative feedback as to the creativity or originality of the strategy of outcome. Cognitive strategy allows to manage and plan our learning process, setting us how to go about that. Verbal information, example of learning outcomes. Stating previously learned materials such as facts, concepts, principles, and procedures. Condition of learning. Draw attention to distinctive features by variation in print or speech. Present information so that it can be made into chunks. Provide a meaningful context for effective encoding of information. Provide cues for effective recalls and generalization of information. Verbal information, which is simply memorizing facts and being able to recite them later on. So, some example of verbal information, knowing that the capital of Philippines is Manila. Knowing your name is also verbal information. Motor skill, example of learning outcomes. Executing performance involving the use of muscles. Conditions of learning. Present verbal or other guidance to cue the executive subroutine. Arrange repeated practice. Furnish immediate feedback as to the accuracy of performance. Encourage the use of mental practice. Performance involving the use of muscles, choosing your muscles to do things, it's a motor skills. Running, hopping, jumping, skipping, holding a pen, dunking a basketball, handwritten, all of these things involve motor skill. Attitude, example of learning outcome. Choosing personal actions based on internal states of understanding and feeling. Conditions of learning. Establish an expectancy of success associated with the desired attitude. Assure student identification with an admired human model. Arrange for a communication or demonstration of choice of personal action. Give feedback for successful performance or allow observation of feedback in human model. Attitude are the outcomes of erring that influence choices of action such as increasing willingness to exercise. Advantages of Robert Gagne's method is that takes learner attitude into account. Gagne considers the learner's attitude and tries to motivate the learner to actually want to learn the subject. He associates the new topics with previous knowledge and builds the student confidence level. To try to be trained on these new methods, he allows for trial error so that the students are allowed to make small mistakes and on their past experiences. And at the end of the training, students should be able to perform new tasks independently. It's a great communication strategy as the students actually want to learn throughout the process. For this advantage, it was clearly designed for a military purposes, so it does discourage free-thinking. It may not be so useful for some subjects that require more abstract thought, such as philosophy or other subjects.